episode of the Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis podcast. Join us on our journey to learn more about the Christian faith and how we can live it out in our modern world. We've heard a lot about ChatGPT and various other AI tools, but have you heard of Magisterium AI?
Thanks, Rigel, and thank you everyone for tuning in to another episode of Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis. We are returning today to a topic we've touched on many times before here on the podcast, which is artificial intelligence generally, and we're going to be speaking with Matthew about using AI for good. To frame the conversation, as always, we're going to draw upon someone else's wisdom. Today, we're going to pull a quote from Pope Francis, who once said, "We rightly rejoice and give thanks for the impressive achievements of science and technology, as a result of which countless ills that formerly plagued human life and caused great suffering have been remedied. At the same time, technoscientific advances, by making it possible to exercise hitherto unprecedented control over reality, are placing in human hands a vast array of options, including some that may pose a risk to our survival and endanger our common home." So that comes from Pope Francis. We're going to be chatting about AI and maybe some concerns therein when we think about using AI for good with Matthew Sanders. And by way of bio, Matthew started his career as an infantry officer in the Canadian Forces before he entered the Catholic seminary, studying at the Catholic University of America. He discerned out of the seminary and returned to Canada, initially working for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and consulting before joining the Archdiocese of Toronto, helping to rebuild the Office of Spiritual Affairs. He then founded his own company, Longbeard, which led him to Rome, where he worked with numerous Vatican organizations, such as the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, helping them to more effectively leverage technology to accomplish their missions. Matthew helped lay the technological foundations for the Pope's Migrants and Refugees section, which the Pope uniquely runs personally. Today, Longbeard builds AI products to serve the Catholic Church's mission. Magisterium AI, a generative AI product focused on making church teaching and Catholic insight more accessible, is currently used in 165 countries. Vulgate is an AI-powered library platform powering an historic digitization project with many of the pontifical universities in Rome. Matthew is also the CEO of Humanity 2.0 Foundation, based in Washington, D.C., focused on accelerating human flourishing, as well as a venture advisor at Klutz Ventures and an executive mentor at the world's largest aerospace accelerator. So Matthew, thank you for being here with us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Maybe to start us off, you've got an impressive sounding resume there. I just read it off. Can you walk us a little bit through your own faith journey? You entered the seminary, discerned out, but you've obviously stayed closely affiliated with the church, using technology to better and further the church's mission. Can you walk us a little bit through your own faith journey and how you got to where you are today?
I'm sure. What's not included in the bio is I'm a convert to the faith. So I was raised, technically I was baptized Anglican, but raised predominantly in the evangelical church. And I was chasing a girl who was Catholic, and she was going to a Catholic college at the University of Toronto. And so I ended up at this evangelical, ended up at a Catholic college, which she didn't end up going to, by the way. So I was kind of marooned there. Anyways, while I was, amidst this Catholic context, I thought it behooved me to learn a little bit about this faith. And so I took a class called Why the Church by a professor named Solano at St. Michael's College, University of Toronto. And I went in there with all my prejudices about the Catholic Church, and he just systematically took me apart. It was epic. There was many classes where we just basically argued back and forth, but I realized that I wasn't giving enough respect to this church. And that kind of started me down a journey, which eventually led to me becoming Catholic. And then soon thereafter, I left the military and entered seminary, which was an amazing opportunity. I felt I grew a lot in that period. But it was my vocation, as you mentioned. And when I got back to Toronto, I ended up just doing some professional consulting. But something was missing, like in my life. I mean, I loved working for the church. I mean, I couldn't think of anything more worthy to commit my time and energy to. So I was kind of discerning, what do I want to do next? And I ended up developing a friendship with Cardinal Collins. And this opportunity at the Archdiocese of Toronto, the Office of Spiritual Affairs, came up. And so I just said, here's an opportunity for me to jump back in and help the church out. And so worked there for a number of years and ended my career there as a special projects manager. One of the last things we did was help bring Steubenville conferences to Toronto. And so it was a great way to kind of cap off my time at the Archdiocese. Seeing a stadium full of young people during Eucharistic adoration was something really to behold. But anyway, to shorten this long story, I'd always been very passionate about technology and reaching young people. And so I left the Archdiocese of Toronto. I found a company that I could be uniquely focused on that, and that work took me to Rome and working for by the grace of God, the Holy See, and others. And of course, when AI dropped, I saw an enormous opportunity, having followed the technology for some time, to leverage that to support the church's mission in a unique way. And that's kind of what brought me up to date.
It's funny, as you were talking about your experience at University of Toronto, I was thinking, oh, that story sounds eerily similar. And so I'll let Travis interject here.
Yeah, Matthew. So I would have gone a little bit reverse order. So I was born and raised in an evangelical Baptist house. My father was an evangelical pastor for 35 years. I then found my way, ultimately, I left the faith entirely and found my way gradually back to Christianity, stumbled into Anglicanism almost accidentally, and then started at the same time a master's degree at the University of Toronto. And I have the ability to take classes at the Catholic colleges, not just the Anglican colleges, including St. Mike's, which you referenced there. And similar experience. I started, taking these classes with these Catholic professors who had really good answers to all my naively formed and incomplete objections to the church and the church's teachings. And yeah, one by one, sort of my objections started to fall away, and ultimately found my way to the Catholic faith. And so slightly different than yours, but also a convert to the faith. And
Very cool.
yeah, a lot of what you just said there really resonates with me. Rigel, back to you to ask a question.
Yeah, I also just want to add, isn't it so interesting, like the ways in which God works? You went to the college actually for a girl, and God's like, so you care about her, huh? I'll show you, and just created a pathway. It's always awesome to witness. Matthew, I have to ask, even for me, when generative AI became a trend that was happening, even when ChatGPT initially came out, I was blown away by its capabilities. I didn't initially place the connection to how this could impact our faith. Obviously, I've used it a lot more for that since then. But what opportunity did you see that led you to creating Magisterium AI?
Well, as a convert, I'd long been, and I was in the seminary. I was with the Paulist Fathers, which was evangelical community, the first one raised in the States for the purposes of converting America to the Catholic Church. I'd been very passionate about sharing the great gift that I'd been given with others, and so I'd always been trying to think about how can we leverage in technology and media to more effectively evangelize. And there's so many great use cases of that out there. But AI has unique possibilities in this regard, namely that its ability to have a near infinite memory, right, and kind of perfect recall. And so when ChatGPT dropped and we learned a little bit about its training data, basically the entirety of text available on the internet, and we saw how, for the most part, effective it was at answering basic questions. We said, okay, obviously this still needs some work and development, but there's enormous potential. And if we could find some way to put together a large Catholic training set, right, or at least to start a knowledge base, and then put an AI on top of that, wouldn't that be an amazing tool? For not just like lay people like myself, but I think even for clergy and stuff. I mean, the church's teaching is vast, and so asking them, expecting them to be walking like a human encyclopedia, always being able to to answer any catechetical question you can imagine is unfair. And so the biggest challenge, and we learned that Catholics were already using ChatGPT, right? So when it dropped, it wasn't soon thereafter we learned that Catholics were asking sophisticated doctrinal questions to it, but we also knew that this technology had limits. Its propensity to hallucinate. And so the big question we kind of posed to ourselves is, could we do this better? I mean, is there a way that we could find a way to mitigate the downside of products like ChatGPT's, namely hallucinations, provide more transparency about where the AI generated responses are coming from via citations. And if we could build such a system, could we basically deploy it and basically encourage enough people to use it and test it that we could get it to a safe enough space that we could then open it up to everybody? And so that was kind of the initial challenge that we undertook.
I appreciate how you pointed out there our expectations of members of the clergy. You're exactly right. Oftentimes we will just assume I've got a complex question. They better be able to answer it on the spot, which is preposterous. I mean, we think about the complexity of life itself, and then you throw into 2,000 years of the church's teachings, and it's such an unreasonable expectation. Yet I think it is exactly what the average person has. I'll use a simple example. Last year, I was doing at the University of Toronto. This class I was doing was at St. Augustine Seminary, which is one of the constituent colleges of the Toronto School of Theology. St. Michael's is one of the other ones. And I was doing moral theology. And I had my process of conversion to the church was well underway at this point, but there were still, as is often the case, it's the moral questions oftentimes that trip up a lot of people in our Western secular culture today. And that was very much the case for me, that it was some of those things that led me away entirely from Christianity in the first place. And so I was kind of thinking going into this class, I was kind of thinking, this is where I catch them. Like this is where it all falls apart, and there's no way there'll be excellent explanations to these hyper complicated things. And then surely, of course, throughout the semester, it was shown to me that even in the most complex scenarios, the church's teachings piece together. But you have to understand the layers and the foundations, and it builds upon it. Now, if I was just to go into my parish and back the priest into a corner and say, here's the scenario, explain it to me, that's a completely unfair thing to do. Obviously, what it takes oftentimes is a lot of careful thought to build upon the history and the foundation that is there. And so it sounds kind of like what it is that you're talking about, Matthew, is using technology so that that sort of foundation can be more readily accessible to answer complicated questions in a variety of scenarios. So maybe from that perspective, can you, because we have a lot of people listening here who will either barely know what AI is, they probably never even used ChatGPT or anything like it. Can you explain sort of on a foundational level, what is Magisterium AI all about? Like, what does it actually do?
Sure. I mean, for those who don't understand what artificial intelligence is, it's basically humanity's attempt to replicate human cognition, the ability to think, learn, and know in machines. Magisterium AI is kind of a complex system, we call it. It's a number of different technologies kind of working in concert to try and produce the most faithful answers possible to your questions around truth and faith. There's two different components to Magisterium AI. So there's a magisterial mode, which is kind of the default. And so if you ask a question in magisterial mode, it's referencing official church teaching. And then there's a scholarly mode, which you can switch to, which is expanded beyond. It's built on top of magisterial teaching, but also includes wider theological and philosophical introspection from the fathers of the church. Includes biblical commentaries and so on and so on. So the way it works is you submit a prompt or a question, and one of the AI systems takes that question, converts it to a mathematical expression of the meaning, and it uses that mathematical expression to search a knowledge base, which has been converted to mathematical expressions, to try and find we call like little snippets, which are relevant, pericopes, which are relevant to your query. So one AI kind of goes and grabs them all and brings them all forward and says, okay, I think these pericopes will be useful in answering your question. Then another AI takes them and says, okay, well, how do I summarize these all and generate a coherent answer based upon the user's prompt? And that's essentially what's happening under the hood. Now, there's a lot more than that, but that's put it simply, what's happening. So right now, it utilizes something called RAG, which is retrieval augmented generation. So instead of you asking a question to the AI like ChatGPT and it just goes into its brain or its parameters and it does kind of a knowledge dump from there, which most of the time works. Sometimes it doesn't. What we do under Magisterium AI is everything that the AI is generating is grounded in sources, and that helps ensure that it's accurate, that we're transparent about where the generated responses are coming from, and also helps present something called exponential drift, where these AIs just tend to kind of the longer they talk, the more they just tend to just drift and become nonsensical. So that's currently what the system's built on, but we are right now in the process of preparing to train the world's first Catholic foundation model. And so that training should be finished by end of September. So when we roll that out, that'll be something entirely new. But the current system works like that.
That is awesome to hear, because one of my questions coming into this was, do you think that there is a need for a foundational Catholic LLM? Just because, we've seen the way these secular institutions have trained their data, the way that they've even fine-tuned the LLM, or large language model, for those who don't know. We've seen the effects with Google in Gemini and how they kind of perverted that AI with their diversity, inclusion, and equity initiatives and stuff. And we can see how that goes wrong. And so to be founded, or grounded rather, in Catholic teaching and, based on Catholic text purely, I think there is a huge benefit to that, and it's awesome to hear that you guys are working on that.
So, Matthew, I'm a big fan of a podcast called Pints with Aquinas, and the conversations, you're probably familiar with it. They can get very philosophical. And I was just watching an episode the other day, and the host of the podcast had a theologian on, and they were having a conversation, and then the host decided to pull up ChatGPT, and they were asking some version of the question, well, what is life, trying to tap into that, and the answers they were getting back, and it kind of became a joke because they asked multiple times, and the questions became, they were various forms of begging the question, and they were like self-referential. So in defining what is life, it would then refer to living, and it's like, well, how do I know what living is if I can't define life? And so they kept going back and forth, and ultimately they realized like ChatGPT is not helpful in this instance because it keeps defining itself by the definition that it's giving. So in terms of AI, like speaking from the perspective of, I don't know anything about the underlying technology itself, how, when you were building out Magisterium AI, would you avoid scenarios where you ask something of the technology and it would spit back an answer of basically just because the church says? And why do we listen to the church? Because the church says to listen to the church. How would you avoid scenarios like that we see in some things like ChatGPT?
Right. I mean, one of the challenges that the big companies have is they're trying to build a product which everyone will find useful, helpful, and hopefully not too insanely biased, right? I mean, that's an impossible task. So, and I want to give like a shout out. When we first started Magisterium AI, even when we were in the midst of testing, I was stupid. I did an interview with EWTN. It was very kind of them to offer, to provide us the interview, but it was too early. And after I did it, Magisterium went viral, and we ended up going down. We were able to get back up because Sam Altman basically directly intervened and lifted our API caps. People put back in business.
No way.
So before I answer, I just want to say, I mean, I give we owe a lot to people like Sam and OpenAI that we're able to do what we can do. But they have an enormous challenge trying to make everyone happy. And the other thing, to keep in mind too, is that, these AIs are built on top of large training sets, and those training sets are very, very diverse, the data sets. Multiple values are expressed in there. And so the AI is trying to make sense of these. It has very little context of where you're coming from. So, and then also on top of that, they will often put in kind of rails to ensure that the thing is answering in a very safe way. And so that's where you'll find it gets self-referential. It just won't answer the question, is because it's trying to play it safe, right? And so that can be irritating, especially on when it comes to existential issues. So the difference with our approach is we're not trying to please everybody. We're just trying to straight up answer your question from the perspective of the Catholic Church. And the knowledge base that we're giving our AI access to is church teaching, and that's insanely consistent for the last 2,000 years. And so, and in many ways, our task is a lot easier. Now, trying to ensure that the AI doesn't hallucinate was a whole battle, which goes on to this day. We made a lot of progress in that area, but what we've found is when you ask like an existential question about Magisterium AI, because it's referencing a certain kind of philosophical and theological worldview, it's able to answer that a little bit easier.
So Matt, just so our audience can understand, can you maybe explain this concept of hallucination just so they understand what you're talking about?
Sure. There's a bunch of different ways to kind of explain that, technical ways, but I think the simplest way would be if the AI doesn't have the answer to your question in its brain parameters, it has a tendency to make it up. So it's eager to please is one way to put it, right? It wants to give you an answer. It's trained to give you an answer, and sometimes even if it doesn't have data in order to base an answer on, it'll just make it up and make it sound very authoritative. So that's been one of the biggest challenges with large language models. I could go into the architecture with the problems with autoregressive LLMs and why this is an enormous challenge, which it's going to be very, very difficult to address. And I think I agree with Jan LeCun, Meta's leading AI scientist. We probably need a whole new architecture. But one of the big reasons why AI's platforms like Perplexity have done well is they have a different approach. So instead of, again, like loading all the information inside of ChatGPT's brain, then having just basically write an essay without hitting backspace once, right? Just blah. Products like Perplexity use a RAG system, and so they use a combination of different approaches to get you a more solid answer. And so Magisterium AI uses RAG as well. Perplexity also uses web search and other things, and so they do research. And what they're trying to do is more and more they're trying to build these AI systems so they can plan their answers, right? So when you ask a prompt, the AI is thinking about, okay, what's the best way to approach this? What does an ideal answer look like? Okay, now how do I then walk through some chain of thought exercises here from A to B and arrive at a good answer? And the more the LLMs are able to kind of work agentically or in tandem with other LLMs to kind of think things through, the better the answers are. And so this is kind of the new frontier in LLMs, as opposed to this just blah, just spilling of knowledge from its parameters.
I do have a follow-up question because as Travis was talking about, if you ask a generic question like "What is life?" it's very difficult for the LLM to answer a question like that. Even if you ask a person might answer that it's a bunch of chemical processes, right? So if you don't give it context, it's going to have a very difficult time giving you the answer that you're looking for. So there was also the rise of prompt engineering that came with LLMs, and so there's an onus on us as the user to give the LLM as much a context or background information as possible about what you're looking for, so that it can collate the information and give you the right answer. Can you maybe give our listeners some advice on how to engineer a prompt within Magisterium AI to get the best results? Or do you have like prompts that Magisterium AI just presents as a template or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing I think is when you're approaching LLM, just recognize what it's not, right? So typically when you approach someone and you ask them a question, well, there's already some assumed context there, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're asking the question of some particular individual, you're probably asking that person because they're wearing a collar. So you contextually know what their knowledge is, right? Or you're asking a professor in class. Well, you know what their area of expertise is. So when you ask the question, you know the answer is going to come back with within certain bounds, right? Because there is that assumed context. With an LLM, it doesn't have that context, right? It has no idea where you're coming from. And so if you ask it a "what is life?" question, it's going to be a very broad and probably unhelpful answer. But if you follow up and say, okay, thanks for that generic answer, but I'm actually asking more specifically along these bounds. Give me a philosophical, answer to what is life. You get a better response. If you go and say, would you please break down for me the different philosophical understandings of life, according to philosophers of the last millennia? Even better, right? That's even more focused. So the big thing is just to think about what kind of answer are you looking for, right? And any kind of context you think will be helpful, just add that into the prompt. Define that for the LLM, and then it'll hit it out of the park a lot more likely.
Matthew, I'd love to ask a question sort of a philosophical nature on the topic of using AI for good, but I'll give a tiny little background about the problem with making big predictions about the future. So about a decade ago, I worked in asset management, and at the time a report came out, I think it was in the UK, from one of the giant consulting firms around the world. And it was something to the effect of, by 2025, like 40% of all jobs are going to be automated, either largely or completely. I can't remember what the study was, but it was like apocalyptic scenarios in one use of the word apocalyptic. And I bought into it. I mean, I was an analyst. We were really, really bullish on advances that were being made, we thought, in the field of AI and stuff. And so we see this and we're like, 40% of jobs is a lot of jobs. And so we panicked. What we didn't see coming, obviously, was the pandemic, which theoretically should have advanced a lot of technologies for a lot of reasons, because the world shut down. And so technology, we all became more reliant upon technology. And yet here we are, we're almost a decade into this thing. I don't think there's any indication whatsoever that 40% of jobs have been taken away. If anything, I think the numbers, depending on where you are, would show the opposite, that employment has grown. Now, the nature of some jobs have changed, of course, but this apocalyptic sort of scenario hasn't materialized. So as a financial analyst, I'll be the first one to throw financial analysts and economists under the bus and saying, you make big bets as if you have a crystal ball. It's impossible to know. The world's too complicated. Having said that, we also can look back at history and see how technologies advance, and over bigger amounts of time, the change that it does lead to in society and for our daily lives. So with that as background, I read something the other day about some, technologist in California has said that he predicts that in the next 20 to 30 years, the moment of the singularity is going to be upon us. And the singularity, in his explanation, is the point at which human intelligence and artificial intelligence meet. And inevitably after that, human intelligence takes a back seat to artificial intelligence. And he says that this is going to happen within 20 to 30 years. Now, I don't put a lot of stock in these big predictions, hence the little story I shared. But clearly, artificial intelligence is advancing. It has advanced significantly. If you go back 10 years from now, ChatGPT and other products like it weren't on the market. And yet here we are today. You're in charge of one, you've built one. So from a philosophical perspective, do you have worries, concerns around AI generally? And what do you see happening in the future as the technologies continue to develop?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one that I'm preoccupied with a lot. So yeah, yes, I have a lot of concerns about the way AI could end up impacting human civilization. I would say I'm not an AI doomer, but by any means, I would consider myself more of an AI boomer. That said, AI is the most powerful technology that humanity's ever invented. I would say by a long shot, even, and it's gonna fundamentally change the way we live on planet Earth, and it's gonna happen real fast. Um, I, I feel that stronger certainly now than I did a few years ago. So anyone who's underestimating the impact of AI on civilization or arguing it's 10 years away, 20 years away, needs to start talking to more technical experts. This is one of my critiques of the economists and everything else is they tend to base a lot of their projections on a conversation they had with a technological leader, right? And a lot of these people are just really they're critics, that they're not real experts. There's a difference between, like, let's say a Max Tegmark, right? One of the greatest minds when it comes to AI. He really understands. He's great. I would say AI like philosopher. And I have immense respect for Max and in some of the other. I don't. It's not really entirely fair to call Max an AI doomer, but yeah, the doomer school. That being said, there's a big difference between Max Tegmark, who's a professor at MIT, by the way, and Jan LeCun, who's a professor at NYU and heads up Meta's AI division. Okay, so Jan's been building these like AI systems, for like 30 years, leading AI systems. He's an engineer, right? He's closest to the technology, therefore he is more likely to understand its true capabilities, not the hype. Hey, so if you talk to someone like Jan's not a doomer. He thinks that we'll be able to control AI. He doesn't think it's going to run away and destroy humanity because it'll be engineered very slowly and it'll be done kind of a very kind of open way. And so we'll find ways to keep it on the rails despite its intelligence, continuing to exponentially, increase. Um, but that being said, I would say in 10 years, if you're asking for kind of a sensational prediction, I wouldn't be surprised if half the world's population is gainfully unemployed. And that's not just because of AI. That's robotics, AI and robotics, right? Because AI is coming for white collar, robots are coming for blue collar. And given the innovation that we've seen, from Tesla and Figure in robotics, and the combination of AI with this is about to really take off. I mean, these robots are already being deployed. They're already in Amazon's factories. Tesla's starting to use them. So what I've really been trying to encourage the church to do more is they're already having great conversations about the kind of the philosophical regulatory implications of AI and how do we best make sure it's we keep AI on the rails and stuff. But what I would like to see a lot more of is a very practical conversation um, about where civilization is going to be in 10 years because of AI and robotics, and what's that world look like, and what could be the possible downsides, and how do we get ahead of this and help to mitigate that downside. I mean, the way I look at this, um, if people don't have a reason to punch in, like they have no actual job, that and so for a lot of people that'd be existentially terrible. I mean, what would they do with their time, right? I mean, they could go down really destructive rabbit holes, or they could disappear into a virtual world, and that's where they live out all their ambitions and things like that, which I think everyone would agree is not a good thing, considering we're having a hard time making babies as it is, right? I mean, we're spending all the time in the virtual world, geez. But so that's one way to look at it. The other is if people are properly formed and prepared for this, this could be one of the greatest opportunities in the history of humanity. I mean, this could be opportunities to invest more in myself, growing spiritually, growing my mind, investing in my human relationships, investing in my family, right? Taking up hobbies, committing myself to art. So again, it's all a matter of how we frame this increased amount of time that AI and robotics will bring us. But that requires a level of human and intellectual and spiritual formation that is not present right now, and governments are not going to be able to provide that. And so I think the church has to take a lead in this. So I'd like to see the church start talking more about where we're going to be so they can start helping prepare people for what I think is this inevitable reality.
Couple things I want to add there. You mentioned, Matt, how it's it's going to change the way we live for sure, and I think we see that already with a lot of use cases that people have found for AI. There are AI friends where you don't have to go out and talk to other people. You just have this AI tool that you talk to and you can interact with. I mean, we're already seeing a loneliness pandemic. These sort of things are going to make things far worse. Like you said, the possibility of people just living in a virtual world seems very real, and it seems like people would opt for that just because we almost already kind of do. So I think the real danger with AI again is not in how far the technology will advance, but in the ways that we adopt it. I think there's a great opportunity for homeschooling parents, for example. Like we're not all theologians, and so how do we educate our children on the faith and educate them in various disciplines? I might be a mathematician, but I don't really know chemistry well. Like, how do I teach my kids? Well, AI tools can probably help with that. And homeschooling is a great option for Catholics these days because if there's not a fear, there's at least a lack of trust that our kids are being well stewarded in schools. And so, yeah, I think the way in which we adopt AI is really the scary part for me. Like we've seen it in a bunch of movies, but even using AI in like defense tech, for example, you take the human component out of it. You've got like unmanned aerial vehicles who have targeting systems that are AI based, and they can make decisions, for example, based on the information that they have. I think that's a very dangerous place to be in. I can definitely see that we would go that way, but it is a scary thought, and we're already seeing a lot of use cases where I think AI is being misapplied.
Can I ask you a question, Matthew? Rigel hinted there. So both Rigel and I, our wives are pregnant. We're expecting our first children, and
Congratulations.
yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Exciting, also nerve wracking, obviously, although that's normal. And in addition to this little podcast, we also do other stuff. One of the things I do is I teach in universities, so I'm an educator to some extent. I'm also a huge geek, so I love to learn myself, and I think a lot about the future decisions that I will make for our children in terms of education. And the lion's share of people in Western secular culture will typically choose education, or try to encourage their children to choose education if they're going to pursue it after primary education based upon career prospects, or where will it lead. Now, I have no idea what that's going to look like if and when my children get to that point, but it's going to look different than today. I'm certain of that. So when you think about the future, and you said, you could see a scenario where 10 years from now, a huge number of people are gainfully unemployed, as it were. Well, when you think about a scenario like that you think is not unrealistic, that we could be there, what sort of advice are you giving to people, either in your own life or if asked, about decisions that people need to be making about education decisions today, when you envision a future like that could very well be upon us sooner rather than later?
Well, I think the first thing I'd recommend is it's important to understand what AI is, what its capabilities are, what robotics is, what its capabilities are, and so that way you can more easily assess. You can read smart people, listen to smart people as well. Make sure you get you sample from a very diverse group, and that way you don't pick a career path, right, that's going to be monopolized by AI systems or robotics. And it's difficult. I mean, some of the fields I think will be heavily disrupted will be medicine. I expect law, and then of course any kind of automation that happens on the floor of a factory, right? And then analytics positions I think will be hugely disrupted as well. So I would say if you're going to move into that space, then you have to really start thinking about how you're going to work with AI systems, right? And recognize what they're going to be able to do and what you uniquely can bring, right? And give that a really good critical think. So that would be on a kind of professional level. On a personal level, I would say, for parents, what I'd recommend is focus as much as you can on helping your kids to discover what they're good at, what are their natural gifts, and what do they love to do. Because AI is gonna significantly increase the capabilities of human beings by basically allowing us to think and get more done effectively. And so there'll be a lot more competition. The job market that is there will be highly competitive. So if you're not exceptional in a particular area, you're going to find it's going to be very difficult, right? So again, like that's leaning more into the job. But I also think just from a life perspective, if you're not going to have to punch in, but you still want to feel like you have something, you have gifts, and you want to be able to make a meaningful contribution, to the common good, to starting what those gifts are and making sure that those gifts and what you're putting your time and energy into are rewarding enough that you would do it regardless if there was money involved will be key. I think that'll be absolutely key. And then of course teaching them the importance of building human relationships and that there are ways to level themselves up, in real life, spiritually, philosophically, intellectually, and how those committing your time and energy to leveling yourself up is going to be rewarding to you more so than in the gaming verse. And that's going to be, I think, one of the biggest challenges is that's going to be so alluring, that game where I can go, I commit my time and energy into a video gaming where I see my character level up, he gets more power, I get more affirmation. That's very alluring. And so in real life, often real life doesn't feel like that, right? So, but there are ways to do that. The Saints are great models of that. So teaching the kids to appreciate the ways of leveling yourself in real life and the benefits that'll have, I think will be key.
Oh, that's really good feedback, Matt. I think it's kind of scary to think about that world because we feel like we're already living in a hyper competitive time, and to imagine that so many jobs are going to be lost, or not lost, but just taken over by AI. So I do wonder though if AI would, as we've seen before with even basic automation that we already have, AI isn't really taking over jobs. What it's really doing is it's allowing us to do more work with less time. And so I wonder if the jobs will still exist. It's just that there will be more output required of each individual compared to what it is now. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in a lot of fields that's true for sure, and that's been parodied by a lot of experts, particularly the ones that deal that do require some degree of human to human connection, like I say the art of deal making. I don't think we're going to be in a world in 10 years where AIs are just figuring it all out and just informing us of the decision they came to. There'll still be humans in the loop there, just need a human being to sign. Um, but there will be other professions where it's just not going to be cost effective for companies to keep human beings employed. When you think about like the factory line, machines can work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's no unions and things like that. So I just, even if the human beings who run the companies would like to keep human beings involved, if they're going to compete, they just can't, right? And this goes beyond just the factory setting into all kinds of different, areas of the economy. So yeah, just be careful. It's not, the issue is not so much a matter of the people involved and do people want to see human beings continue to be engaged within this particular sector of the economy. It's more what will be required in order to compete in the future, and is it going to be their choice? And I think in most cases it really won't be, because one country that has different laws may allow for a greater level of automation, which means that they can produce products far cheaper, and then they're going to sell them overseas. And so if you want to compete with them, you have to, or the government's going to have to come up with some crazy trade trade regulation to try and protect you. But I just don't think long term that's sustainable. So I think it's more logical for us to just adapt and recognize where there'll be real significant opportunities and make sure we're investing our time and energy there.
An example from a personal story, and an example of where I think AI is going to massively impact jobs. You referenced in medicine, Matthew. And I think a lot of people find that hard to believe because we think about medical professionals generally. We will think doctors, nurses, highly educated people, hardworking, stable careers, lucrative, etc. And so we find it just intuitively like, no, there's surely those people are about as safe as it gets. Well, going back 3 years ago right now, I started having heart issues. No history of it previously, having heart issues. Went through all the tests possible here, and the cardiologist couldn't find an issue here. I knew what my body felt like. So I'm like, no, you've missed something. And if you're not going to test further, I'm going to keep pushing this. So I ended up going to a hospital in the United States, had more tests done. They found something there. I came back here, showed the cardiologist, and he looked at the same scans and he's like, oh yeah, I missed that. Now, an AI wouldn't have missed it probably. And I know that because my best friend, who has sadly passed away since then, but my best friend was a biomedical engineering technologist, had started a found up in the space, knew a lot of cardiologists and a lot of specialists. And when I was telling him what I was going through, he was explaining to me that there are technologies in other parts of the world that are being used already that massively reduce the amount of human interaction there is involved in this process. Now, the doctor will get involved when it comes to communicating with the patient at the end. Like that isn't being automated yet, at least. That's not being automated. But the identification of the issue itself is largely being impacted. And at some point, I would imagine there will be no humans at all involved in that process because human error is too big an issue and too big a risk. So I think that to me was a wake-up call about, wow, yeah, like I can see the benefits here of AI and how even these highly educated people will become redundant, at least in this aspect of their jobs. Do you have, does that example resonate with you? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, medical profession. Okay, I don't want to pick on doctors. I would probably single out more bureaucracy and the whole regulatory regime. It's a cartel, and it's not helping, inspire as much innovation as there should be. Like I know in my own conversations with people in this space that there is immense. There's a lot more work that could be brought to bear to significantly help people, but because of regulatory challenges and things, that really slows down the ability to kind of. So like I think medicine by far will be one of the sectors that we would welcome as much disruption as possible. And there are certain places around the world, and these are countries that they have very few doctors and they have enormous populations, and they've very not very successful at serving them. So they're looking for any edge they can get to help help people at scale. And so these are the companies these are countries which are usually the early adopters here. And usually you'll see the United States and stuff. They'll kind of trail behind. But again, this is I think primarily at this point it's a kind of a political question. I think it's ensuring that our politicians we're trying to bring this up as an election issue and encouraging our politicians to actually to encourage as much innovation and deregulation in this space as possible, so that companies and VCs and investors won't feel disincentivized to invest because they know that there'll be 10 years of expensive regulatory they have to get through. But the big thing I think that will change the paradigm that will change is, nowadays we show up to a hospital when our heart's not working or something like that, right? Where you already have a crisis. In the future, I mean, we're all wearing, devices which are grabbing all kinds of data about our habits and all kinds of internal biological data. So the question is, if we're aggregating all that data, how can we meaningfully use it, right? And so when you hook up analytics platforms, which are able to kind of look at your lifestyle, right? And some people go beyond that. They even feed it information about what they're eating and stuff. Those analytics platforms will get very good at predicting based on your genetic history and everything else, what could be a problem in the future. And if they start seeing signs which are looking troubling, they can alert you and say, you should go and get this checked out. And by the way, here's the body of evidence to justify why you're showing up. Even showing a digital medical record in advance to your doctor, which is then crunched by the hospital's AI, right? And then basically the doctors are there, as you say, to speak to the patient, to explain in human language what's going on. But the analysis has been done by AIs. I mean, that's the future. And I think I think we could be there in a few years if the regulatory regime was different.
I have to wonder, Matthew, now, is this almost a philosophical question based on what Travis just said, and also a personal example from my life? We were both working for a family office. We were responsible for a couple of small businesses that were in our portfolio. There was a new contract that I was required to draft, and I was able to create at least the first draft on ChatGPT and sent it to our in-house lawyers. And when the lawyers saw it, like, they weren't familiar yet with ChatGPT's capabilities, and when they saw it, they were like, "Wow, junior lawyers are in trouble." Now, the fact that he said junior lawyers specifically tells me, and we know intuitively, that senior lawyers, because of their experience working in the junior roles and working their way up, and the experience that they've amassed over the years, they have a capability that ChatGPT does not have. But you need to go through that junior lawyer phase to get to the senior lawyer phase. So I'm wondering if education will change to adapt to the existence of AI tools, so that people kind of skip over that junior phase, get straight to the senior phase. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, to speak to the issue directly, 100%. I mean, ultimately, the senior lawyers can be better at prompting because, frankly, they're able to provide the meaningful context which is necessary to generate a better response. The junior lawyers don't have that context, and so they're not going to be as effective, right? But you can think about the paradigm is to simply change. What the senior lawyers need to do is just to help train the junior lawyers how to prompt better, how to provide the right context to generate the right responses. So, right, so that changes the dynamic actually within the law firm itself. I think like education is another area that I think will be hugely disrupted, and I think we're all kind of welcoming this disruption. Although it's a little bit disquieting. We're old enough that going to university and getting a degree was kind of necessary, right, to get a job. Whereas more and more, employers like Musk care less about that. What they care about is what you're able to actually build and do. Show me what your capabilities are. Like, I don't want a piece of paper to tell me what your capabilities are. I want you to prove it to me. And I think there's a lot of really exciting opportunities for people via AI to level themselves up from a skills perspective and then build things which can really impress people. Khan Academy, which is one of the leading AI platforms in the world, teaming up with OpenAI to build kind of this AI grounded education platform, which basically allows the AI system to understand uniquely the particular capabilities, the way that the actual student thinks, and then design a curriculum purpose built for this person to help optimize their learning experience. That's the future. And I think you mentioned, Rigel, about homeschooling. I think more and more, particularly like in the States, I think people are going to be less comfortable with education. Depending on who gets elected, I suppose that their concerns will be more or less. And they're going to be opting to homeschool. But I think that's a lot of pressure on parents. I mean, now you're asking to be a master of experts. Whereas if they can leverage an AI system to help with the education of their child and just make sure they're monitoring it and everything else, putting their prompt engineering in there, that could be an enormous tool. So I think that's inevitable. Children will be learning with AI. They already are. And they'll be doing some more and more. And as AI systems are better at building kind of populating vector spaces around users to understand them uniquely, it will come up with better curriculum, which will make them more and more effective.
So Matthew, if it hasn't been made clear, I'll share Rigel and I's dynamic a little bit. So we've been doing this for years, not just on a podcast, but in other settings and stuff, where Rigel tends to be the techno optimist, and I tend to be the techno pessimist, and so I will spiral into doomsday scenarios. Rigel will always see the upside stuff, and the truth is probably somewhere between those two extremes, admittedly. But I'll be honest, there are sometimes, if I go back and reread parts of the book from 10 years ago, Superintelligence from Nick Bostrom, which was, kind of the one that became, I guess, most well known when people were starting to talk about, this, the potential of AI to take us somewhere. Not just AI, that's not the only type of superintelligence he's referring to in the book, but, I think about things like that. I'm like, I can see that happening. It worries me. And so I will go to a point where I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to be a subsistence farmer. I'm going to buy, my wife is from Colombia. Land is cheap. I'm going to buy a little farm there and I'm just going to provide for my family. And that's it. I don't need a job. I don't need another master's degree. I'm just going to do that. Now that might be an extreme response to some of the things that I'm worried about. But can you tell me, like, we're talking about using AI for good. Can you tell me what things would make you optimistic, I guess, that would lead me not to want to go and buy a plot of land in Colombia, build walls around it, and just provide for my family? What good things do you see either now or potentially in the future?
Well, I think when it comes to like health and wellness, and I would even argue from an existential level, I think AI systems can contribute enormously to humanity. I think lifespans will increase, quality of life on those traditional benchmarks, all those Maslow things that, AI and robotics be able to build houses cheaper. So, basically every metric, I think AI can be of assistance. I think that the bigger question was on the existential plane, how much, and I mean, obviously I built a product to help with that. I think AI can be enormously helpful in that regard as well, keeping in mind that it's not the AI per se, it's the ability of the AI to synthesize, revelation, right, and philosophical insight and distill it so that we can understand it, right? So it's not the AI itself. So I think I think you could be optimistic. I think saying, trying to work against AI or slow it down, I think is a waste of time. At this phase, it behooves everybody to think about how they want to adapt. Now, how you want to choose to live in a world which is dominated by AI and robotics is a whole nother matter. And I think for some people, opting to, just unplug and, do some systems farming, think that may work. I mean, why not? I mean, my wife and I bought 10 acres of land and I plan to move out of the city and do that as soon as I possibly can. Now I plan to still have something like Starlink. I got to stay connected. But I like the idea of being, connected to nature again and working with my hands and having time for things like hobbies. I think that's just going to be actually that may help us reclaim some of our humanity that's lost, right, in the modern world. All that being said, I do think that the AI doomerism point, there's something to that. And the Pope has made this point as well. Whether AI ends up being a big boon for humanity or ends up dooming humanity is up to us, right? Really.
Yeah.
So I think having really strong regulations to ensure that AI doesn't run off the rails, ensuring that more importantly the public is informed where AI is at and what its new capabilities could mean for society, and so they can all kind of decide how do they feel about that, and they can put pressure on the companies, right? I think that's going to be extremely important. And again, engaging people in even the civil process, making sure that these issues are election issues, right? And people have the opportunity to vote on them. So candidates aren't ignoring them because they don't understand them, which is a major problem right now, right? So raising the IQ of our politicians, but also our clergy, so that they're able to kind of reflect on it as well, because people will look at these technologies and have existential dread. So having a clergy educated so they know what the technology is and And I think that's really as simple as just listening to the Pope is saying, because he's very, very well counseled. Just quickly on the doomerism thing, though, I do agree with you on the Kuhn that AGI, or artificial general intelligence, which is a precursor to artificial superintelligence, is not going to be an event, meaning it's not just going to like just show up. It's going to be something that'll happen very, very gradually. There's a whole bunch of, I'm not going to get into them, but there's a whole bunch of technical breakthroughs that are going to be required before we can achieve AGI. And I don't think that's like next year. I think it's going to be a few years away. But I do think because it won't be an event, we'll see it coming, and we should be able to effectively mitigate the downsides of AI. I think an artificial superintelligence, which is another way of saying an AI smarter than the entirety of humanity combined. Obviously, there's all kinds of ways that could go off the rails. But if it's something that we slowly developed over time, very carefully, I don't really think it's going to turn its guns on us. And namely, like my instinct about that is I just don't understand why it would, right? I mean, certain species have built into them, like chimpanzees and lions, this need to dominate. Other species, like orangutans, don't, right? And so as long as we're not building into the systems this desire to dominate, I just don't think it's going to have that. It's going to do that. And the other point being, the other argument that doomers would make is, yeah, it's not going to intend to do that, but it's just going to like get the math wrong, and we're just all going to die as a result, right? It's going to transform us all into paper clips. And again, I think that is most likely an outcome if it was the AI did come online and we didn't have a chance to kind of look into the black box of its brain and foresee this. But again, I just don't think it's going to happen. I think it's going to be a slowly developed over time, and we will have some instincts about how this thing can go wrong. We'll have all kinds of cool ways of testing the AI, including using other AIs to test the AI. So I would say that the doomers are things that we should pay very close attention to and study. I think more work and energy needs to go into that. But I would say all in all, our disposition should be it's going to improve the world for the better.
Awesome. Thanks for that explanation, Matthew. We're getting close to the end here, but I do have some questions. I'm very curious, and so I hope our listeners are curious as well. What does the 5 to 10 year vision look like for Magisterium AI, but also for Longbeard? You seem to have the finger on the pulse of various technology, not just AI, and so I'm hoping you're going to continue doing the work for God and using these technologies for good. So can you tell us what the future plans are?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Longbeard at this point, we initially created the company. It was to help any organization try to advance the common good, but now we're kind of all in for the church. So, leveraging AI in unique ways to benefit the church is kind of, it's our thing now. So Magisterium AI is kind of like our beta AI product. The next phase, as I mentioned to you, that we're training kind of the world's first Catholic foundation model, preparing to train, which will be called Ephraim. And that AI, we want to make available to Catholic organizations, ministries all over the world. Anyone who wants to use it. So we're going to build it, and then we're going to allow ministries to build on top of it via an API. And so that way we can help support the product community. And we're having a forum at the Vatican, an AI forum, October 24th, 25th, where we're bringing together the biggest kind of ministries, at least in kind of the English-speaking world, biggest ministries, universities, thought leaders in kind of the AI space. Or those who have ambitions to be in the AI space together. So we could talk about how do we build Catholic AI, and we'll be sharing with them at least our initial contribution. And so, our focus is going to be B2B. So, how do we support others and building on top of what we're doing? So we're more focused on, making sure that the AI is continually expanding in its knowledge, ensuring its greater and greater fidelity to church teaching, its understanding of church teaching. And that'll be our primary focus, but we'll also be developing applications simply to kind of prove some use cases. So we're right now developing an AI spiritual guide, which will profile users kind of on a spirituality, personality, and decision-making level, and then kind of build a vector space around them. And then with the AI's understanding of where the individual is and where they want to go, helping to draw down from our massive knowledge base and put together kind of a personalized plan of life for them. And that's something that we think it wasn't possible 6 months ago, but we think in the next few months it will be. And so that's something we're currently building. And we're hoping by demonstrating the abilities of the technology, that others will adopt it and use it accordingly. So that's kind of where Longbeard's going. We also have a couple other product lines. So Volgate, our AI library platform, was built predominantly to help libraries digitize And so we're focusing on, as you mentioned in the beginning of the call, helping pontifical universities digitize their library holdings. And that's about just making them available to people around the world a lot easier and cheaper than they are now. Certain AI vector databases and things allow you to take a library, which is made up of diverse languages, and make them language neutral. So anybody can query them and understand them in their own language, which is super powerful on any device.
Wow.
So that's the kind of the mission of Vulgate. And of course, there's a benefit for us as a company too. I mean, when you're building it, when you're training an LLM, you need data, lots of it, more and more data. And so by helping these universities digitize, we're getting our hands on more data, which we can use to help train our LLM. And it's amazing. I mean, a lot of the books in those libraries haven't been opened in hundreds of years. And so they don't even know what's in them. So when we go through and we digitize them and then bang, they get thrown up into our vector database and now you're able to query them. It's incredible, these insights you can draw down from. So Vulgate's another one. And there's another product we'll be launching shortly. It'll probably be online next week called Christendom. And that's kind of a Catholic daily wire. And so it'll be a big aggregator platform. Your guys' content will be in there as well. People can kind of come and they can kind of sample and look what all the Catholic content creators are. And we built this because we just felt we've heard people talk about this, a platform like this should exist, and we were like, well, do it. But we're kind of busy on the AI stuff, and they said, well, if the engineering is good. So we said, okay, well, let's build the technological stack and let's put it out there, and that gives us a unique opportunity to leverage AI as well, because it allows us to create a unique recommendation engine leveraging AI to help match people to the content creators they're most likely to engage with. So I don't know if we'll keep that platform at Longbeard. We may end up spinning that out, selling it to someone else to run with, because we're not a media organization. But it's another use case for AI that we thought was powerful and could be a service to the church.
That's super exciting. Like, there were a number of things in there that I was just like, wow, that's insane. I can't wait for it to come out. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, Matt. Travis, do you have any other questions before we wrap up?
No, I've got like 1,000, but Matthew's a busy man and he's got more important things to do, like actually going and building these things so we can use them at some point rather than talk to us about his plans to do so. So no, Matthew, really appreciate you coming on here, sharing your wisdom and your words of encouragement too. Don't be surprised if I send you a note asking about buying 10 acres of land and stuff, because I'm still not convinced that isn't the direction that I have to go, notwithstanding the comments about reasons for optimism. But yeah, really appreciate you coming, sharing your insights and stuff. And to the listeners, please go check out Longbeard. From there, you can get directed to the other things that we've chatted about and stuff. And Magisterium AI itself is awesome. I use it. I love it. And so yeah, you should check that out if nothing else. Rigel, do you want to lead us in a quick prayer here to wrap us up?
For sure. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the gift of fellowship and allowing us to come together today in your name. We pray that you continue to grant us the grace to answer your call and to use our skills and abilities to do work all for your glory. We ask that you bless Matt and his team and their efforts to make our 2,000-year-old faith more accessible to your followers. Saint Joseph the Worker, pray for us. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Rigel, for leading us in prayer. Thank you again, Matthew, for joining us. And thank you to all of you who tuned in. This has been another episode of Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis. We hope you'll turn back again next time. Join us.